triathlete for Great Britain.
As a world champion and Paralympic triathlete, I wanted to tell the world some of the stories behind the people and the personalities I have met throughout my 9 years in the sport. With the Paralympic Games around the corner, now seems the perfect time to get to know some of the para triathletes who will be going for gold in Tokyo.
And today I'll be going beyond with Australia's Nic Beveridge. A lifelong sports fan, Nic was 17 years old when he was diagnosed with a neurological disorder that left him paralysed. That simply began a love of parasport and triathlon, and his first international competition came in 2013 at the World Championships in London. And after finishing 9th at the Rio 2016 Paralympics, he is now targeting a place on the start line in Tokyo. You lived an able-bodied life until you were 17, and you woke up one morning and you were paralysed from the waist down. You were diagnosed with transverse myelitis. It's a rare neurological condition that attacks the spinal cord. That must have been an exceptionally difficult moment. I couldn't have even imagined what that would have felt like. Are you able to sort of share with us how you accepted it and then rebuilt yourself afterwards?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I was 17, and I suppose for most people who then get confronted with some sort of significant change, you don't really see it coming. So it really kind of hit me out of nowhere. I was just at home chatting to a mate on the phone one night, and I think we had like a water polo final the next day, and we were just kind of bantering about that, and suddenly it just got really hard to breathe. I thought maybe I was just having a bit of indigestion from dinner or something, so I sort of like, and maybe typical Australian, I was like, no, I'm just being soft, like kick on. And then after like another minute or so, it would really intensify to the point where I was like, nah, there's something not quite right here. I got downstairs to my parents, and just in that space of time, my body had started going into like quite fierce spasms from maybe like here down, like chest line down. Thankfully, like my parents reacted really quickly under the circumstances and put me in the car. And I thought I remembered everything about like the car trip there, and have been quite cavalier about it. Like, yeah, no, I dealt with it fine. But my parents kind of told me a few years ago that apparently I told them I thought I was dying. So that sort of paints the picture of how maybe intense everything was at the time, even though I seem to not remember. Lying in like the emergency room, the spasms had kind of become even more ferocious to the point where the last thing I really remember is like both my legs spasmed up in the air at like a 90-degree angle, and then I just passed out. When I woke up, I think it was like a few hours later, I sort of was like lying in my own little hospital room, and I was just had the nurses station out through the door, and I was lying a bit squiff. And as you probably know, like you just think about doing what you want to do and it just happens. Like you don't really have to think too hard about it. And I wanted to straighten, and I just wasn't. I was sort of just staying kind of like crooked and uncomfortable. And then I started like purposely thinking about it, and things still weren't really changing. So I ended up having to grab the hospital bed rail and kind of like pull myself straight. I then tried to call for help, but I couldn't really yell anymore. As you mentioned, it turns out that what had happened is I'd got transverse myelitis from T4, which is sort of like, I don't know if you can see, but about there down. So it affected my diaphragm and stuff as well. So I couldn't yell, and I ended up just having to lie there and wait for the nurses to come around and be like, hey, I can't move. As you mentioned, from there, like accepting a significant change can be really hard. What I found is like everyone can kind of tell or give you an idea of the physical change and how to adapt physically. But no one really gave me a manual to deal with the whole emotional side of things. And being 17, you sort of, I suppose, have like a level of arrogance where you're like, yeah, like life, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And these are the things I really like doing. And I can't wait to kind of do all that. And then having a lot of that taken away, I suddenly just didn't really know who I was anymore, and I didn't get a manual for it. And I don't know, I kind of just ended up feeling a little bit lost. I'd kind of liken it to you live your life on the beach your entire life up until one morning when you wake up and suddenly you're just in the ocean, and you don't realize how you don't understand how you got there. And the familiarity of the beach, it's still right there. You can see it, but everything in your world is different. So it's kind of like my mind from the day before had been lifted and put into this similar but different Nic, who's suddenly in a different world, and there's all this, I guess, disharmony going on. And everyone kind of deals with that differently, I suppose. But for me, it ended up going on like about 9 years, where thankfully my parents forced me to participate in life and things. But I sort of felt like I was doing it without much purpose or passion. And I'd say my point of difference when I played sport as an able-bodied person was that I was just hungry. I just wanted to get to the ball before someone else, or I wanted to touch the ball before someone else. Wouldn't say I was exceptionally talented or anything. That was just kind of my X factor, I suppose. And this light switch feels like it's been turned off, and you don't have that anymore. Sport just didn't even really feel fulfilling to me anymore. And I just sort of felt like I was, I don't know, lost. It's funny how like good things can come wrapped in really weird ways sometimes, because my health had actually deteriorated as a result of my disability, like this 9 years on, and I needed quite invasive surgery to correct the issue. The only downside to that was I was going to need like 3 months bed rest to recover. So it was pretty full on. And it just so happened that the London 2012 Paralympics were on TV during that time.
Yeah.
I hadn't really engaged with the Paralympics up until that moment, which was interesting, seeing as I'd had a disability for 9 years. But again, I guess sport just didn't really mean much to me anymore.
Yeah.
I'd love to be sitting here and say like, oh, I watched the London 2012 Paralympics, and because of that, I wanted to be a Paralympian. But I actually didn't. I watched them, and I watched athletes compete, and I thought it was really cool. I did think it was cool. It was awesome. But it kind of taught me like a valuable lesson about inspiration as well, is that it's not something that you get to choose. Most of the time it's something that will find you. And what actually inspired me for the first time in my life wasn't athletes competing. It was a snippet of one athlete's profile that got aired in between the competing coverage. And to this day, I don't understand what it was about this one part of their story, but it was like they lost their leg to cancer and then went and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro a few months later. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like that light switch just suddenly got flicked, and I was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing with my life? Like I was just suddenly overcome with this desire to do more and be more. I still had full use of my upper body and everything. So I was like, surely there's got to be something I can do. As you can imagine, going 9 years feeling a bit lost, and then suddenly having all this energy you've been craving for years was exciting initially, and then it turned into frustration. So I was like, well, where am I going to put this? Like, I still didn't know what I wanted to do or anything. So I did what most people probably do when they're looking for answers, and I turned to Google, and I just kind of typed like, I don't know what possessed me. I think I was just looking for a challenge, and I was like, extreme endurance para sport. And this article about a guy called Bill Chaffey came up, and he was an Australian, and he competed in a sport called Para Triathlons. I think he was like a 3-time sprint distance world champion, and the article was about him training for the Hawaii Ironman. After reading that article, I can comfortably say that and the athlete's profile that got aired at the Paralympics are the only 2 times in my life where I've been inspired. I finished that article, and without ever having ridden a hand cycle or used a race chair, I was like, triathlon's for me. It just is. There's a guy called Dr. Bruce Lipton, and he sort of talks about harmony. And the best analogy I can use, I'm going to borrow from him to describe this connection with triathlon, is if you've got 2 acoustic guitars and they're tuned the same, if you pluck the A chord on one, the A chord on the other will actually vibrate because it operates on the same frequency, even though it hasn't been touched. And that's, I know, it's strange, hey?
That's beautiful.
And that's how, that's what I'd describe as myself and triathlon. We're just tuned the same. That's all I can put it down to, because otherwise I don't understand why I felt this connection with it.
No, and I think that's like a beautiful story. The fact that, you know, for so long, I was born with my disability, so I don't know any different. And I could only imagine that for somebody that has lived what is an able-bodied and is used to such a way of life, to then have it all stripped back and have to start from scratch. I think even now, if I had something happen, however strong I am and having dealt with a disability, it would still take me a bit of time to adjust and reevaluate where I was going. And I think the fact that you found purpose through sport, I've seen that a lot within the Paralympics. Like I've done 3 games now, and each time there's always one athlete that I've met and, you know, had a conversation with, whether that's been they've lost a leg in a war, or in your case, you know, you've woken up one morning diagnosed with something. Sport has given them a purpose. Sport has given them the drive back. It's opened them to a world of Paralympic sport. I didn't know of Paralympic sport until I joined a local club, and this lady said, "Oh, have you not seen that there's a disability competition in Sheffield?" And I was like, "No, what's that? I don't know." So half the time we end up stumbling into the world of disability sport. But I think now, you know, as the Paralympics have progressed, and I think that the standard between the Paralympics and the Olympics is getting shorter and smaller. So actually more people are aware of Paralympic sport. And you said you watched London 2012. I did Beijing before, and then I watched London. And it was as though the UK had the Olympics and they were a bit down and sad, because they were like, oh, it's done now, it's gone, all that like excitement. And then came the Paralympics, and everyone was interested to learn about the disabilities, how it all works. And they were so inspired that, I think it's amazing what people do for Paralympic sport and how much we don't realize, how we inspire people. Just listening to your story inspires me. So let's hope that everyone listening to this can see just how amazing you are. So I have a couple of questions now on the moment that you decided, I am going to become a Paralympian, I am going to race. That was 3 years before you actually stood on a start line at a Paralympic Games?
Yeah, it would have been, my first Worlds would have been London in 2013. So I actually started training at the start of 2013. And as you've probably seen with the Great Britain team, there's a lot of equipment that a wheelchair athlete requires, as there is for all of us relative to our classification. And the price of it can be quite a hurdle for some. So for me, like it was one of those hurdles. I'd sort of coming off kind of 3 months bed rest where I wasn't able to work, and the few months leading into that where my health had gotten quite bad and I wasn't really able to work. I just didn't have the money that I needed to get the equipment. So I just started, when I finished this article with Bill and I knew that I wanted to do the sport, I was like, I'm going to have to get my hands on this stuff somehow. So I actually just started like researching organizations and looking for people who knew people who might have gear that I could borrow or hire or whatever. And that's actually how I got started. I hired a hand cycle that it wasn't an elite level one at all. It was kind of like one that you ride casually through a park on a Sunday. And that's actually what I took to London. I went to the London Worlds on that one. And yeah, was able to borrow a race chair as well. And like, it'll always feel like a rite of passage for me to be in the sport, having started with that gear, because you had to earn it. Like it took effort. And then even then, once you had it and you could feel that once you had something that was more custom for you, you were just going to open this whole new room for performance where you didn't know where the ceiling was. And the effort to go through to then strive to kind of then be able to upgrade and everything. Definitely fulfilling. And I'll never kind of take for granted the equipment I have now, especially when you do start competing and, a Paralympics is 3 years away. It's probably the furthest thing from your mind, to be honest. And I'm sure if you went and asked some of the other athletes who were competing when I first started, whether I'd make Rio, they'd probably laugh. And to be honest, I probably would have laughed too.
Yeah. But I think I've literally got a list here of all of your positions. So you came 17th in London, and then 3 years later you did qualify and you came 9th. And then I've got 2017, you got fourth at grand final in Rotterdam. So you have literally progressed year after year and just chipped away at all three disciplines to come away with a silver medal at the Commonwealth, which must have been awesome because that was in Gold Coast. So racing in our home country, that's pretty cool. And then you also got a silver at the last grand final that we had in Lausanne. I mean, for you, that must be incredible to look back and see just how far, well, para triathlon as a sport has come, but you yourself have come.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't get a silver in Lausanne. I didn't go very well in Lausanne.
Gold Coast.
Gold Coast. But yeah, what I like about the wheelchair men, and that's the only class I can really speak about genuinely because I'm in the thick of it, is that when I first started, Bill was obviously like the world champion and kind of the benchmark. And to his credit, the level that he operated at in his time, it sort of pulled the rest of us up. It was kind of like, well, this is what's possible. So if you want to go for gold, like this is what you have to be aiming for. And then the boys that have kind of come along since have kind of picked up and carried that tradition onwards, where they've raised the benchmark to an even higher level, and we're all like, okay, well, that's what's possible now, so let's go. And it's becoming, I'm probably the best version of myself now, easily, as a triathlete that I've ever been, yet I could potentially go to a race and come away with my worst result. And I love that. I love that that's the level that all the boys are at, and you honestly just don't really know what you're going to get. You really kind of have to earn your results, and it's exciting.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And could you just explain to us, I guess, as well, a bit about your category? So the wheelchair category, there is a time difference. Could you explain to everyone the time difference that happens and why that's there?
Yeah, sure. So in the PTWC, men and women, I suppose to cater for the diverse range of impairments that are within that class, they created two subclasses, H1 and H2, in order to try and, I suppose, balance things out. So the H1s, they'll go, I'm not sure of the specific times, but I think for the men it's about 3 minutes, and for the women it might be a little bit more, like three and a half, I think. I'm not sure. And then the H2s will go whenever that time has passed, and then wherever you finish is where you finish. So for the H1s, you're almost like the rabbit, and the H2s are kind of like the dog. Like you're either being chased or you're the chaser. So it sort of adds an extra element of excitement to the race, in that you don't know where you are until you finish, in a way.
And the difference between being a H1 and a H2 is based on the amount of core control you have. I can't remember quite how it's distinguished. What is the I guess the part between which you become a H1 and a H2?
Yeah, I'm not heavily involved in the classification process, so I don't want to misspeak, but I think you're right. It's around trunk and hip and core function. I believe there's some criteria around those areas that distinguish as to whether an athlete falls into the H1 category or the H2. Yeah.
And obviously when you're racing, all categories used to have a handler, because I used to have a handler, and my dad is very grateful now that he's not my handler anymore. But obviously, could you talk us a bit, I guess, through any adaptations you have when you are training and you are racing, but also you have a handler and the role that they play when you're doing a race?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of, I suppose, in the spirit of just wanting to be fast, and the F1's probably the best example, where they have like a pit crew. I would liken a handler to our own pit crew in transition. So for a lot of us, we probably could transition ourselves, but I suppose with that diverse range of impairments within, some are going to have a huge advantage when it comes to doing it themselves versus some of us doing it by ourselves. And that's where the handler comes in. I think it kind of like levels the playing field in a way, at least in transitions. So for my handler, I come in and he'll basically just rip my wetsuit off and kind of help me transition quickly, but like a bit of a rag doll, because he's a big guy. get me in the bike, put my legs in the straps, we belt in and kind of off. And then again, coming in for the race chair, he'll kind of just pick me up and just plonk me in the race chair. Whereas for me to do something like that, you're probably looking at an extra few minutes or something. So it definitely like adds speed to the process.
Yeah. And is that a relationship you've built with him? You only ever have one handler, or do you have a few that, if one can't make it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I suppose in the current climate we're in, it is hard for a handler to make races. I have actually had a few over my career, and my current handler is, I'm not sure if you knew Sally Pilbeam. She competed in the 3. Yeah, so her handler is my handler is her husband, Matt. So he sort of has a vested interest in the para triathlon space, and Sally's first Worlds was London in 2013, and I met them both there, and we've just kind of got along since then. So there's a fair bit of history there, and I like the fact that he gets it, but he's passionate and he cares about performance. So it helps. Yeah, he's kind of got that perfect mix. Yeah.
Well, I guess you are trusting somebody with what people say is the 4th discipline within a triathlon. So you've got to have that bond. You've got to understand each other. So yeah,
that's exactly right.
I totally get that. And if we sort of break down swim, bike, run now, and what adaptations you might have to do, how different is your training, whether that's swim, cycling, running, compared to what the likes of an able-bodied athlete may do?
It's an interesting question, and I suppose I'm still evolving, which is exciting. So the training that I was able to handle a few years ago was very different from probably the training definitely the training an able-bodied athlete was able to do. And I remember talking with Joe Townsend a year or so ago, and sort of just asking like, oh mate, like what are your loads and volumes like? And he was telling me, I was like, oh mate, my body just wouldn't even be able to handle that. Whereas now I'm sort of, and in my mind that then became a little bit of a benchmark. I'm like, well, that's what a wheelchair male can handle. So there's got to be ways to kind of unlock the physical ability to be able to tolerate it and adapt up and not break down. And thankfully we've found ways to do that. So that's kind of a level that I've been able to push to now, and I feel really proud of that. And I'm sure that I can probably even continue to evolve more. It's becoming more and more. When I talk to some of the able-bodied triathletes that I know, there's some weeks where I will have done more training than them, and other weeks where they'll do more than me. But it's nice to be at least in that realm now where my upper body is able to tolerate those sort of, I won't call them excessive, because they're required. It's loads that are required to be high performance. And it's just nice to be able to get to that spot where your body's adapted and injury isn't so much of a concern anymore. And you can just enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I remember swimming alongside Joe once when we were in Lanzarote together, and I'd done my swim set, and I was like, how long are you going to be? He's like, oh yeah, I'm doing 4K. And I was like, you've got no legs, Joe, like 4K is going to take forever. But he did it, and he smashed out some amazing time. So yeah, I know just how, incredible distance and volume can be. And it is mindset actually over most things. And talk to me a little bit about your bike setup. Do you have any that is specific just for you, that you've, worked out that works just for you? Obviously, like I have my own setup on my bike that if an able-bodied person got on and they tried to brake, it would be quite amusing because one side wouldn't brake. But is there anything in your bike that, is something that you've worked out just for you?
Not too sure. In general, with the recumbent hand cycles, I suppose one thing that I always struggled with was taking corners and kind of taking them at speed. I sort of found that my body would sort of kind of almost shift. I didn't have the full control to like hold myself still. Yeah. So as you can imagine, as you're going around a corner, if your body's shifting, it's changing your balance and the weight distribution on the bike, and you feel like it's then going to like tip.
Yes.
So something that was probably game changing for someone like myself was actually getting like a custom cushion, that almost like a racing seat that was molded for me. So when I took a corner, my body didn't move on me. It held me where I wanted to stay. And suddenly I could take corners and take them at speed, which I couldn't do before. So that's probably the biggest thing. Maybe every guy does it, I'm not sure, but given that through my own ignorance, I'd kind of gone a few years, and by a few years, I mean most of my career without it, and now suddenly I've got it. I'm like, how did I go so long without this?
Yeah, no, and it was actually in Rio. I don't know if you remember. Did you ever race Phil Hogg?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I raced through. Yeah.
Well, he let me sit in his race bike, and it didn't go very well because you need the two hands for it. I was just there going in a circle, so I definitely know how hard they are. And what was the hardest for you? Because obviously you said 9 years, not part of parasport. You guys fly around a run course as well. Like you're sort of 13-14 minutes to do the 5K. It's really impressive. What was more difficult, learning the hand cycle or learning to be in the race chair?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd probably say the race chair from a technical perspective. And maybe that's coming from my own personal baggage, because the first time I used a race chair, I ended up like a turtle. I'd sort of like pushed myself up too far, and then the front wheel kind of flipped back, and I just sort of was like, I was like, how do they do this? This is so hard. Whereas the hand cycle, I didn't have any issues like that the first time. So maybe that's why the race chair felt hard. But yeah, technically I'd definitely say there's more to the race chair than maybe gets respected.
Yeah.
And the hand cycle, it has its own technical elements as well. And there's a lot of respect that needs to go with that. I've probably just found the hand cycle, if you put the time in and your mind's open and you want to get better and you want to put the work in, I've found the gains in the bike will come more easily than the gains in the chair. The chair is so technical that if something's off, you're operating against the ceiling. So that, like, the hand cycle is hard, but comparatively, I'd say it's easier, because if there's something wrong in the race chair and you're unaware of it, you're in trouble.
Yeah, no, well, I have admiration for you, because just swim, bike, run is hard on its own, let alone, doing it in equipment that's specialized. Like, it must be amazing. Although I wouldn't mind running a 5K in 13 or 14 minutes. That could be very useful. But I'll never get there, so it's fine.
Don't say that.
13 minutes, 14 minutes, definitely not. Like, Tokyo, obviously last year, you were probably all geared up for it. You were raring to go. I can imagine that, Australian Para Tri had done heat and humidity training. Everything was prepared. How different is your lead in this year? Obviously, Milan, we're hoping, is going to go ahead in not too long, in May. Is everything on course for this year?
Personally, I'm feeling good, and the last year has probably helped refine my mindset a little bit more by way of just being able to adapt and kind of expect change. Like normally, and you're probably the same, you've got your race schedule, and last year would be the first time a race had been cancelled in, at the time, what was 8 years of racing for me. So that was quite a bit to then wrap my head around. It was like, oh, okay. And then we ended up not really racing at all after March. And that was difficult, because, as you know, there's a lot of training that goes into being a triathlete, or being any athlete, triathlon particularly. And you do want to kind of throw it down every once in a while. The racing is such an important part of being a high performance athlete. So there was a little bit of mental adaptation that was required. By way of this year, same deal, like, probably have to stay more flexible than anything. I know I'm unsure of the circumstances that other countries are with, but I know, being an Australian, traveling internationally at the moment is really difficult. So for a race like Milan, I probably wouldn't go, just because we might not even be able to get home, or get home when we want to. There's too many moving parts at the moment that make it difficult. But by way of Tokyo, I'm treating it like it's happening. I'm treating it as though I could get the call up. So everything we're doing is kind of just building to that. And if any races happen between now and then that's a bonus.
Yeah, and you had a very successful past weekend, I believe.
Yeah. We were really lucky that we were able to have our national championships in Tasmania.
Yeah.
And so it was nice to come away as a national champion. It's always a good feeling being in a proud Australian and being like, yeah, I'm an Australian champion.
Yeah, I saw your smiley.
Knowing you've worked for it.
With your medal, you were very happy. Did it feel painful because it's been such a long time since the last time you raced? Like, was your body like, Nic, what are you doing to me?
No, it was probably afterwards. Yeah, it was like, what have you done? Like, why did I deserve this? Even though you can train really hard and do specific sessions that prepare you for it. In reality, nothing really compares with racing. Racing just it just takes you to another level. And the body's been a bit flat this week coming off that. But at the time, I wasn't feeling it. I think I was just happy. I was just enjoying myself. It was fun. Like, it was nice going to a race and kind of being more looking forward to just doing it as opposed to all those other elements that come with it. So I actually really enjoyed it. I had a really, really good time. And it's just been the last few days I've been paying the price for it.
Well, if it doesn't hurt, then didn't do something right. So that's what I've learned.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to hurt. So, and that's really cool. And you spoke a little bit about, being a little bit lost after last year with having no races. How has lockdown been? Have you been able to get to the pool? Have you been able to train like normal?
Really fortunate being an Australian and where I live here in Sydney. It was really only a few months, maybe 3 or 4, where swimming wasn't really a possibility in a pool. Yeah. And there was a period there where even rock pools and ocean was probably discouraged. Yeah. I'm fortunate that leading into the lockdown, and this wasn't planned, it was more just by chance, thinking that the Paralympics were on that year. I was like, if we have a really bad week of rain or something, I don't want to miss out on training. So I sort of invested quite heavily in indoor trainers and having really good race chair rollers and a good hand cycle trainer. So then when the lockdown happened, I was in a really fortunate position where I was like, I can still ride and run. The pool was just for a few months there was the one thing that we couldn't do. But I mean, that's not even a complaint from me. Like, I was just grateful we could do what we could do because everyone's in different circumstances. Like, even now, I know some people are still struggling with lockdowns and inaccessible training opportunities and things. So I kind of just, my hope is that the triathlon world can return to normal in a time that's safe, so that everyone can get back to doing what it is that they enjoy, especially those who are like me and they did find their passion in life through sport, and then that has kind of lit fires elsewhere. It kind of started that whole chain reaction.
Yeah, no, definitely. And did you find any weird hobby outside of sport to do in lockdown? Like, I tried knitting at one point, and also sourdough from scratch was a thing here. Did you get a skill that you learned during lockdown?
So I got on the sourdough bandwagon as well. It didn't go well. It did not go well. I persisted with the first few slices because I was like, you want to be proud of something that you contributed to, but it was bad, mate. It wasn't good.
I didn't even get my sourdough in the pot to work, so you were ahead of me. So no, that's
okay.
fine.
But yeah, started playing the piano. Started learning the piano. Yeah.
Oh, that's
it's been good.
Hear some tunes next time. That will be amazing.
Don't know if I'm that good, but I can definitely play some jingles now. So that's nice.
Oh, that's awesome. And on to my final question. Could you please tell us what is your highlight of your whole career so far, and what has actually been the lowest point?
I'd have to, it probably sounds a little bit corny, but I'd have to say the highlight was getting started. mainly because of all those barriers we spoke about earlier. Like
Yeah.
when you are doing your first hand cycle session or you do your first race and you've kind of gone through or persisted with it to get there, like, geez, it feels like a good achievement.
Yeah.
And all those other achievements I could list, like, they only happened because of that start. So I'm probably prouder of the start than anything else because it unlocked all those other things.
Yeah, of course.
A low point, probably coming to a point where, and this was a few years ago now, where, and I'm not sure why my mind kind of got here, but I think I got thrashed really badly in a race. And again, credit to the lads that's the level that they're at. But going to that race, I felt like I was the best I'd ever been, and I came away with a really bad result. And I kind of just found myself questioning. I'm like, maybe I don't have this. Like, maybe I'm kidding myself. And yeah, it really kind of took a week or two of reflecting. And I even reached out to Bill. I sent him a message and I was like, mate, am I kidding myself here? Like, should I be looking to something else in life? And like, his response was awesome. He actually didn't answer me. He was like, you just had a bad race. Go have a burger and a milkshake. So yeah, I think after I had time to process it properly, I realized that no, like, I was hungry. I wanted to come back. Like, I couldn't let these guys keep pushing on without me. I needed to stay in the mix too. But that's probably the lowest point I've had, because it was the only point in my career where my mind went to that place, which is strange. But I'm glad that it's happened, because I don't think it'd happen again.
Yeah, but I think you could look at it another way, in that when things are so important to you and they mean so much, like you want to deliver, if you have disappointed what you thought your targets were going to be, what you were going to achieve, I think it's only natural to feel like you've taken a step back. But I think
that's true.
Like you've said, when you get time to reflect on it and see how important it is, and actually I have failed so many times, made so many mistakes, but I've learned from those and I've never ever repeated them. So I think actually from that race, you learned more from it than if you'd have done really well.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Yeah.
So, no, well, thank you so much, Nic, for coming on and chatting to us. It's been amazing.
Thanks for having me.